Hey, what's going on, everyone? It's Juskewycz here of Daily Fantasy Winners, bringing you another episode of Tee to Green, and thrilled to be back from a week off with the July 4th break and rolling right on into a major championship. And this is the Open Championship, or aka the British Open, and this is going to be part one of a two-part series on the Open Championship. Part one will be essentially the overview of the tournament, and as well as a strategy standpoint from attacking this from a DFS perspective, and also specifically a GPP millionaire maker strategy. And so we'll also answer some questions here that you guys have already actually asked me throughout this last weekend, mainly as far as some strategy things for the British Open, and as well as just some DFS golf stuff. So I've kind of combined a few of them and made them into three questions, so to speak, and we'll dive into those pretty heavily there at the end. That will help from the strategy standpoint here in this video. And then part two will be the picks video, certainly, as well. Okay, so this is the Open Championship. This is the third major championship of the year. It has been, in at least modern golf history, it has always been the third major championship. Not if you go back several years, but in modern golf history, it's been the third major of the year. Around mid-July for quite some time. It is the traditional top 70, including ties, are the guys that will be making the cut, so nothing different there. The only wrinkle I would say that's different this year, and it just basically is going to be one less variable you have to worry about, is that there was no PGA tournament before the Open Championship this year, as the Greenbrier was unfortunately canceled due to the flooding in West Virginia. And so usually the John Deere Classic is right before the Open Championship. However, that was moved to the same weekend as the Olympics, and so that's just basically because the Olympics caused a bunch of the schedule changes, as I'm sure you're well aware of. So with the schedule change and the fact that the Greenbrier was canceled, that's kind of the hand we're dealt with here. So like last year, Jordan Spieth, Zach Johnson, which was really amazing, and the fact that when you think about it, Zach won the tournament, Spieth had missed the playoff by one shot, and they took the red eye from Sunday night from the Quad Cities all the way over to Europe, and so their body clocks didn't get adjusted very well, and they seem to have no problem with it. But essentially, there is no variable like that, and everybody had the chance to get to Europe on time, all things considered. Can't technically speak for every international player, because I know there are a lot of different international players coming from a lot of different tours, but I know most of the people were already playing in the Scottish Open this weekend before, but so most people have been adjusted, and just one fewer variable to worry about. Okay, Royal Troon Golf Club, that is the host of this tournament. The last time it was here was in 2004, and the Open Championship is rotated between several different courses. The St. Andrews, it was at St. Andrews last year, and it moves, the Open Championship goes to St. Andrews every 5 years, and it's been doing that for the last 25, 30 years, something like that. But for the other courses, and it's not the same exact ones every time even necessarily, but generally speaking, the golf courses get rotated every 7, 8, 10, a dozen years. That's not an exact science at all, but it's usually the same historical courses that are used on some kind of a rough cycle. That's the best way to put it. As opposed to the U.S. Open, there are some historical courses that do get used every so often, but it's less frequent, and the USGA has been trying to use some newer courses thrown in there as well, much like they're going to use Erin Hills next year. They used Chambers Bay in 2014 as a couple examples like that. So just a little tidbit there. But let's dive into the details of Royal Troon, how it's going to help us this year. This is a par 71. It tips out at 7,190 yards, not that long of a track. This layout is very similar to St. Andrews, and I'm emphasizing the word layout here. And what I mean by that is the first 6 holes go out along the coast, with the coast on the right-hand side. Not that the water really comes into play, but it's along the coast. Holes 7 through 12 are in the back of the course, kind of winding around one another. And then the last 6 holes are parallel to the first 6 holes coming back inland. And so that's a very similar design to what St. Andrews is. And so that's what I mean by that. And it's also that you're not going to have, 9 holes on one side of the property and another 9 on another side of the property, or at least having the 9th hole come back to the clubhouse. You're going to have the wind going in one direction out the first 6, and then the same direction, then the opposite direction coming back in on the last 6, and then some mixture in the middle. And so there could be something to look at there weather-wise, but we'll get into that later on in the video. However, this is certainly a tighter course than St. Andrews. This is links golf, and St. Andrews is too as well. But I'm just saying it is links golf, and this is a tighter course than St. Andrews. The wind is going to be blowing out there. It's been a relatively wet summer in Troon, and in the UK and in Scotland and everything like that. So, and it is supposed to rain on and off throughout the week and potentially rain quite a bit throughout the tournament. So, yes, the rain can slow the course down a bit to make it easier, but the wind blowing is going to be much more of a tougher element on a course like this. And as of right now, the wind is supposed to be blowing in Troon, 10 to 15 miles an hour most of the time. But at least as of right now, I'm recording this on a Sunday night, so this is way too early to get too concerned about it. But at the same time, if it's already saying it's going to be fairly consistently around 10 to 15 miles an hour, and that's also not really factoring in the wind necessarily on the coast where there's no trees blocking it, the wind gusts will be even more extreme than that. So definitely keep that in mind. And also the last thing to keep in mind about this is unless the course is unplayable for some reason, which ironically did happen last year for a little stretch there on Saturday morning, they're going to play through the tough, brutal conditions, whatever Mother Nature provides. That's usually been the history of the British Open, and as opposed to a PGA tournament where they're a little bit more likely to call a weather delay, and they get some different conditions, of course, too, as well, depending on where it's at. Okay, eagle potential for Troon. There is a small chance of driving the first and third holes that are 367 and 377 yards long. Number 2 is actually 390, and it's interesting. The first 3 holes are actually par 4s that are under 400 yards, and they're the only ones that are under 400. More of an interesting factoid than anything there. But I bring up 1 and 3 because they are drivable if the wind is favorable and the players elect to bring out the driver, which is certainly possible from some of the bombers. And I don't think you're going to see a lot of eagles on either of those holes, and you may not even see any, but it is something where the longer hitters could have an advantage and have some opportunities at eagle. And the flyover videos on the Open Championship website suggested that this is a possibility on hole 1. They did it on hole 3, but looking at the layout, sometimes the flyover videos, they don't necessarily factor in the bombers sometimes with their driving distance a little bit. Sometimes I've noticed in the past with the Open Championship or even the U.S. Open and other majors. So I think number 3 is even an outside shot at that. Let's take a look at the par 5s now. Number 4 is 555 yards. Most people can hit this green in 2, but the longer hitters will certainly be better for an eagle opportunity. Number 6, and keep in mind which hole numbers I'm saying here as well. Number 1 and 3 on the par 4s, number 4, and now we're at number 6, 601 yards. Some longer hitters could actually hit this in 2 with the helping wind. There won't be many eagles here most likely, but with a helping wind, there certainly could be some eagles here. And the reason why I'm bringing up making note of the number of eagles is because I mentioned the layout of this course. Holes 1 through 6 go not exactly, but relatively similarly. They all go in the same direction. And so I bring this up if we're going to get to Wednesday night and we see that the wind is supposed to be blowing downwind on those holes, that means the longer hitters are going to be particularly good because a lot more of the drivable or the more eagle opportunities are on those first 6 holes. That means it would be a lot easier for the longer hitters to have more opportunities. So that's why I'm bringing this up right now, something to keep in mind and down the road. The last par 5 is number 16, which would be going the opposite direction of these. This is 554 yards. Interesting thing about this hole, there is a creek that runs through this fairway at about 280 yards out from the tee. The wind will be playing a major role here in whether players are going to try and carry the water, certainly. But I would think, you're going to definitely want to be a longer hitter, obviously, if you're going to try and drive it over a creek of 280. Remember, it's not if somebody has a driving distance of 290, that does not mean that they're going to drive it over the creek because, A, you're pushing your luck and you hit solidly anyways, but B, it's more the fact that it's a 280-yard carry, not a 250-yard carry. Whereas if you know what I'm saying out here, so people that drive the ball 290, 295 do not just necessarily fly the ball that far. They fly it 270, 275, and they get X amount of rollout, whatever it is. So longer hitters are good for eagles, most likely here. There won't be a ton of eagles in this tournament, but there will certainly be some, and the longer hitters will help. Okay. Statistics for what can help here. This is a different approach this weekend in comparison to really any other video I've done with this. And here's what I mean. If you go back to 2004 when Royal Troon was here, there really were not any specific statistics that jumped out. There were some minor correlations here, but for all things considered, after looking at all this and spending the last few days looking for stuff, there just wasn't that much that really stuck out to me that really drew a red flag. We're splitting hairs here. So distance is going to help you at times. It'll give you a few more eagle opportunities, but you've got to be accurate off this tee because some of these fairways are tight and you need to be able to adapt to the different conditions that are just thrown at you at different times. You need to be a versatile golfer, essentially. Approaches are important. Scrambling can absolutely come into play in terms of sometimes you're going to really want to hit bump and run. Sometimes you're going to want to be doing flop shots if you want to do that and use the maybe hitting into a wind gust to your advantage to get the ball to stop. Also, and that's the other thing, I mentioned lag putting. Putting is also important here in particular because these greens are massive. They are huge, and you know this from watching probably previous Open Championships that these greens are massive. And so that if not just necessarily good putting is important, but putters that are really good in particular from longer distances, kind of like the Jordan Spieths of the world will be doing better as far as the putting is concerned on this course. Again, that's just one element here, one element of many elements here to look at. So that's kind of what I mean there with the putting. So essentially, I am not really recommending specific statistics as far as trying to be concrete with your picks. I would more be using a lot of knowledge and some different kinds of research for your picks. So I would start with this. You want players who are good link style golfers. You can use your knowledge from past tournaments and of course that you have watched or know about, but just go look at past leaderboards of tournaments involving link style golf. And I'm going to touch on this again in just a little bit. I just said versatile players a little bit ago. Basically, guys that are comfortable hitting different clubs off the tee, whether it's a driver, a fairway wood, a utility club, an iron. They're comfortable hitting different ball flights, whether it's high ball flight or a lower ball flight. Guys that play well in the wind. And generally speaking, like I said earlier, you want just guys that are usually play well in or that actually have a history of playing well in tougher conditions. Again, you gotta go back and look at some of the history there. Guys that essentially have strong tee to green games but are relatively strong around the greens. Now, obviously, as I say that, the more expensive guys are more likely to fit this category because if they're good in all categories, they're very likely a very good player. But essentially, what I'm trying to get more in here in a basic sense is you don't want to find someone who is really strong in one or two areas and then very weak in a few others. And that's really somebody that's really dedicated toward a specific course fit. Link style golf is good, but you don't want somebody who is a long bomber but really inaccurate and is good approaches but just has terrible short game, or something that would be vice versa along those lines. That's what we want to avoid. And then also something we want to avoid is, and this is kind of standard procedure, but definitely more so in the majors. I always keep making note of this in the majors because we get more public players in the Millionaire Maker. Fade expected highly owned cheaper players. So these are guys that are going to basically be under $8,000 roughly. You want to be finding some guys that are going to be 15 to 20% owned that are 7K, 6K type of players, because that is way too high for players at that skill level. And there are going to be some good value plays, and we're going to find some picks here, and we'll talk about them more in the next video of some guys that I do think do have good value, but you do not want to be picking the guys that have that high of ownership. You are much better off fading those guys in a field like this with a cut in a tournament like the British Open. So with that, I am going to lead into some of the questions that that you guys have asked me, and I'm going to address them. And I combined a couple of the questions that you guys have asked me just to make this a little bit simpler, a little bit more clear for everybody to understand. And I think this will help. So the first question, and this is probably the most common one I got out of the gate. Do European players do better in the Open Championship as opposed to other majors / big tournaments? The common belief on this is yes. And if you look at the top 10, 20, 30 of a leaderboard in past British Opens, you're going to think, yes, you see a lot of European Tour players. But keep this in mind, there are more European Tour players overall in the Open Championship in comparison to, like, your normal PGA Tour events. The reality is, the fact is that Euros do better than players from other countries in the Open Championship just isn't true anymore from the top players. It used to be true from the top players, like back in the old days, and like even as recently as the 80s and the 70s, it was fairly common Europeans would win a lot more. But really, since the 90s, it has not been true. And here's what I mean by that. Only 4 British Opens have been won by Europeans since 1999. Only 5 have been won since 1992. 2014, Rory McIlroy. 2011, Darren Clarke, the now current European Ryder Cup captain for 2016. 2007, 2008 by Padraig Harrington, and 1999 was Paul Lawrie. So if you by comparison take a look at something like the U.S. Open, there have been 4 European winners there since 2010. Graham McDowell at Pebble Beach in 2010, Rory McIlroy in 2011 at Congressional, Justin Rose in 2013 at Merion, and then Martin Kaymer in 2014 at Pinehurst. So you're probably thinking, okay, so why is this the case? Like, what changed? The reason why is golf has essentially become a more global sport today. There's a lot more money in the game. Players travel a lot more. It's much easier to travel, and simply the more expensive players, the more of the top golfers, I should more say, they play a lot more worldwide, and they just have more experience at much younger ages. As we've seen, golf has become much more, not so much based on the experience of people peaking later in their late 20s, early 30s. We're seeing the stars of the game rise definitely at a younger age more now today than ever. And so the game has simply changed. That's just really the most basic way to put it. And I will say this, though, however, you will see more cheaper players, basically guys that are like 7,000 or fewer, or 7,000 or less, who are Europeans. They are more likely to do well as opposed to like Americans. The reason why is because not just because there are more European Tour players in the event, but because these guys have more experience on links types of golf courses in comparison to the less experienced Americans. If you guys all follow that. If you're taking somebody who's just coming off the web.com tour, from America, and or he just got out of college or something like that, his links golf and European Tour experience will be very, very limited in comparison to somebody who grew up playing in Europe. So there is where you're going to find some more hidden gems in the $5,000-6,000, not low 7,000. We'll just call it $5,000 range, as opposed to maybe some of the other young Americans. That's where you might be finding a few diamonds hidden in the rough that will peek out on the leaderboard that gives you a top 10, top 20 type of a deal. So just to wrap this up with some of like the specific top players like Rory McIlroy and Justin Rose, we'll take a look at them very quickly. And these are in terms of top 10s for these guys, okay? For Rory McIlroy, we're looking at top 10s of all 4 different majors. In his career, he's had 5 top 10s at the PGA with 2 wins. He has 3 top 10s at the Masters. He has 3 top 10s at the U.S. Open, 1 in 2011. And at the British Open, he only has 2 top 10s, even though he won in 2014. The British Open is the tournament that McIlroy has done the least well in as far as top 10s are concerned. And again, taking a look at Justin Rose for top 10s, in the Masters, he has 4. In the U.S. Open, he has 3 with his win in 2013. In the PGA, he has 3 as well. And the British Open only has 2. He finished tied for 6th last year. And then, believe it or not, you have to go all the way back to 1998 when he finished tied for 4th as a low amateur. Or as the low amateur, excuse me. So, in any case, you get the idea here that the top European golfers not as good as you might think for this tournament, but you'll find some diamonds in the rough still in the $5,000 level. We're going to hopefully find a couple there in the next part with the picks video. Okay, second question I'm going to answer. Is Royal Troon like other Open Championship courses, or are there any just golf courses, generally speaking, that are similar to Royal Troon? This is links golf, so I would certainly start there, like I mentioned earlier. St. Andrews and some of the other Open Championship venues are link-style golf courses. And then also some of the previous Scottish Open and Irish Opens have been played at links courses. Not all of them, only some of them. You got to go back there and look at that one a little bit more as far as picking out which one's the specifics. The Scottish Open was at a link-style course here just a week ago. You can take a look at that one. The Irish Open wasn't this year, but you have to go back. I believe several years before that it was. There's a lot of different tournaments you can look at as far as the European those two European Tour events in the Scottish Open, the Irish Open, and other Open Championship venues that are link-style golf courses. But I will also say this, like, even though the Open Championship courses may all look really similar, and they are all more alike than what the U.S. courses are, they are still certainly different from a strategy, statistics, and sometimes even just a layout standpoint. There really isn't like just one or two specific tracks I would look at, and that's why I'm not really naming any other specifically any others, because there really just isn't not every golf course is the same. I would throw a wide net out there at links courses essentially, and just try and get a reasonable sample size with it. So if maybe you don't have as much knowledge and haven't watched as many golf tournaments in the past, you can get a better feel for who are strong link style golfers. Okay. The third question is, and this is the final one, is how big of a role does weather play at the British Open? I've seen in the past where the conditions are absolutely brutal, and is there a way to go about this? Okay, so it can absolutely play a massive role in the British Open in particular. However, predicting the weather on the coast in the UK and in Scotland is extremely unpredictable. And I don't mean it so much from the rain standpoint, I more mean it from the wind standpoint. It is changing directions. Sometimes it stays constant all day, sometimes it changes directions. And we saw this in last year's Open. It changed dramatically and drastically frequently. And so it's a tough thing to go after, but I'm doing this on a Sunday night, so it's not even worth addressing what their direction they're expecting the wind to blow several days out. But here's what I'm saying. Definitely check the weather on Wednesday night. And again, remember, the lock for the British Open is on a Wednesday night, not Thursday morning, because again, the tournament is in Europe. And if you see there is a clear big difference from a tee time wave standpoint, that the wind is just going to be brutal, maybe Thursday afternoon, and it's going to be nasty Friday morning, and it just looks really good and maybe soft Thursday morning, then okay, I can see the way you want to go Thursday morning, Friday afternoon. But essentially, if it's not very clear to you Wednesday night, I would not really worry about it. It's just very unpredictable to do it. Now, if you want to, if the weather does look fairly brutal when we get there on Wednesday afternoon, Wednesday night, what you could do if you're making several lineups and you wanted to hedge is you could make a few lineups that specifically favor or target one tee time wave, and then make a few lineups that target the other tee time wave. Because if there is supposed to be really high winds, and there is supposed to be like some rain and chaos could happen, it might be advantageous just to do that, because the tee time wave advantage could happen. And some people may not try and do that, or some people may actually target the wrong tee time wave. That has absolutely happened in previous Open Championships. So it's a strategy that you can do, but really it's just hard to really recommend anything when we're doing this on a Sunday. But we can talk about that more on the forum throughout the weekend as we get closer to Wednesday and Wednesday evening. So in any case, last note on this. This is actually really important that I just mentioned this. If they're asked about this in press conferences, I've always said this in the past, watching the Golf Channel with these press conferences for players is actually worthwhile doing with research, unlike any other sport, because golfers are very good in interviews, and they open up most of the time, unless they're being asked like about an investigation or something like that, or something that's off the course that they don't want to talk about. But for the most part, most golf questions are about golf, and most of the time, even though there are some bad questions in there, players elaborate very well about, what's going on in their lives, what they're doing, or I shouldn't say what's going on in their lives, but just how their golf game has been, what they've been focused on, and things of that nature. You can actually pick up on some tidbits here and there, but more importantly, they will tell you observations with the golf course and how they think it's going to play. And you can take that information that you may not be able to get in the media just Googling things or looking on Twitter, or checking even, reporters on Twitter, whatever it might be. Anyways, I would certainly listen to player interviews. You might actually get some information there. But the one thing I am saying with this is if they are asked about brutal weather, do not listen to their answers, because they all say the same thing, that they are all look forward to the challenge of playing in bad weather, and that they relish doing it, and that they all thrive in it. That's BS. That's not true. Look at track record when it comes to this. You just have to look up the track record of players playing in bad conditions, and you can look at past tournaments and leaderboards again of previous Open Championships or tournaments of that have had brutal weather in the past. But that's the one area in press conferences I would not listen to players saying, because they're just going to give you the confidence spiel or cliche of they love playing in bad conditions and they like to suck it up and do well. So anyways, sorry for that little bit of a ramble at the end. That's it for part one. Again, reminder, if this is the first time you've done the Open Championship, lock happens at midnight Eastern Time, 9 p.m. Pacific, Wednesday night on DraftKings. So do not stall on this and do things late Wednesday night. It is, and that's, you definitely want to get your lineups done a little bit earlier than that. Get part two out as soon as possible. We'll hopefully have that out for you. We'll probably have it out on Tuesday night, most likely, but hopefully earlier in the day Tuesday. I want to get a little bit more research done as far as looking at some specific players and see what some of the buzz is out there for maybe who might be some higher ownership players. And Golf Channel will be doing live coverage from the middle, starting in the middle, like basically Wednesday night / Thursday morning. So if you're a late owl, you can watch the Open Championship there on the Golf Channel until you fall asleep on the couch or whatever. And then it goes into the morning, of course, and there will be a recorded version in the afternoon. And this is a Golf Channel operation Thursday, Friday. And it's the same thing Saturday and Sunday with the Golf Channel, except NBC takes over in the morning. I only bring this up just because ESPN's been covering the British Open for the last several years, so just in case you get confused. And Mike Tirico will be making his debut, actually, with NBC, which I'm just... no promotional piece here, but I just really like Mike Tirico, and I think it'll be good seeing him over at NBC. So good for him, and looking forward to it. And so part two will be picks for the Millionaire Maker and GPPs coming up soon. As usual, we appreciate all the likes and subscriptions to our Twitch and YouTube channels, so please do so if you haven't, if you've been liking these videos and they've been helping you out. And then, of course, you can follow me at Juskewycz on Twitter, and then DailyFantasyWinners on Twitter at DFSnerd. All right, thanks, everyone.